"Can I sleep here?" she whispered. What the silent Apache did next shocked her Western love tales. Clara had been traveling all day on horseback, her small bag bouncing against her side, the dust of the trail clinging to her boots. She was tired, her muscles aching from hours of riding, and her throat felt dry from the warm wind that had followed her all afternoon. The road had been long and lonely, and as night approached, she realized she had no clear idea of where she would sleep. The western plains were beautiful in the daylight, but as darkness began to settle, they could feel vast, empty, and intimidating. The trees along the edges of the trail cast long, strange shadows, and the sound of the wind rustling through the dry grass sounded eerily like whispers. Clara slowed her horse, trying to spot a safe place to rest for the night. Every few minutes she scanned the area, hoping to see a small cabin or a cluster of trees that might offer some shelter. But the land was wide open, with nothing but the occasional rock formation and the gentle rise of hills in the distance. As she crested a small hill, she saw a flicker of light near a riverbank. Her heart leapt. It was a fire. Someone must already be there. Relief mixed with a little fear. Who would be out here in the middle of nowhere at this hour? She could see a lone figure sitting by the flames. The figure didn't move much. It was a man, and from the way he sat, he looked calm and quiet. There was a strange stillness about him, as if he were part of the land itself. Clara's instincts told her to be careful, but exhaustion made her braver than usual. She approached slowly, keeping her voice low, not wanting to startle him. "Excuse me," she whispered, hoping he could hear her. "Can I sleep here tonight?" The man didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, his eyes dark and steady, unreadable. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. His gaze was intense but not threatening. It was as if he were studying her, understanding her, without saying a word. The silence stretched for what felt like a long time. Clara's heart raced. She had never felt such a powerful silence before. It was strange, almost comforting, yet a little frightening. Then slowly, he nodded once. He reached over and moved a folded blanket slightly closer to the edge of the fire. His movements were smooth and deliberate, showing that he was calm, confident, and in control of the situation. Clara felt a wave of gratitude. She set down her bag and unrolled the blanket, trying to do so quietly so as not to disturb him. She kept glancing at him, curious about this mysterious stranger who had not spoken a single word but had already given her a sense of safety. The fire crackled softly in the evening air. The smell of burning wood mixed with the sweet scent of nearby wildflowers carried by the wind. Clara settled on the ground, feeling the cool grass beneath her. She tried to steady her breathing, still slightly nervous but beginning to relax. The man remained seated near the fire, his eyes occasionally flicking toward her, making sure she was okay. There was a careful watchfulness in his posture, a quiet strength that made her feel safe even though she had never met him before. As the sky darkened further, stars began to appear, twinkling above the wide-open plains. The sound of crickets filled the air, along with the distant hoot of an owl. Clara could hear the river gently flowing nearby, a soothing, steady sound that helped calm her nerves. She realized she hadn't felt truly relaxed for days. Traveling alone had been difficult, and the constant worry about where she would sleep, what she would eat, and whether she was safe had worn her down. But now, by this fire with this silent man watching over her, she felt a small spark of hope. She decided to try to make conversation, even though she wasn't sure he would respond. "It's been a long day," she said softly. "I didn't think I would find anyone here." "Thank you," her voice trailed off, unsure what else to say. The man didn't speak, but he tilted his head slightly toward her, a subtle gesture that made her feel acknowledged. Clara smiled faintly, understanding that some people didn't need words to communicate. There was something respectful and careful in his silence, as if he believed that actions mattered more than words. She felt a strange sense of connection forming already, even though they had just met. She looked around the clearing, taking in her surroundings. The fire was small but warm, casting long, dancing shadows around the area. The river nearby reflected the light of the stars, glimmering gently. In the distance, the hills rose and fell like waves frozen in time. The wind carried the scent of pine and earth, grounding her in this quiet, wild place. Despite the initial fear, Clara felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. As the night grew colder, Clara wrapped herself in the blanket he had provided. She could feel the warmth of the fire on her face and the steady presence of the man nearby. He had not said a word, yet she understood that he had offered her shelter and safety. It was an unspoken promise, a silent act of kindness that spoke volumes. She realized that sometimes trust didn't need words. Sometimes the actions of a person could say more than any conversation ever could. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the sounds of the night. The river's gentle flow, the rustle of the grass, and the occasional snap of a branch in the distance all blended together into a calming symphony. She felt her body finally begin to relax. Sleep was calling to her, and for the first time in days, she didn't feel the fear that had followed her on the trail. Instead, she felt a cautious comfort, a sense that she was not alone, even in this vast and empty land. Hours seemed to pass as the fire crackled quietly, and Clara drifted in and out of light sleep. Occasionally, she would wake and glance at the man, seeing him sitting just as silently as before, eyes alert, listening to the sounds of the night. There was a quiet strength in him, a sense of someone who knew the land, respected it, and protected it without needing to announce his presence. It amazed her how much security a single human being could provide without saying a single word. By midnight, the temperature had dropped further, and Clara pulled the blanket tighter around herself. She could hear the faint sound of the river flowing, the wind brushing past the trees, and the occasional call of a distant animal. She realized that even though she was miles from any town, surrounded by wilderness, she felt safer here than she had in crowded cities. The man's silent presence was grounding, and it reminded her that trust could sometimes be found in the most unexpected places. Finally, as the fire dwindled to glowing embers, Clara allowed herself to drift into a deep, peaceful sleep. She dreamed of the vast plains, the flowing river, and the quiet man who had offered her shelter without a word. There was a sense of wonder in her dream, a feeling that she had encountered something rare and remarkable, something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. When she woke the next morning, the fire had burned down completely, and the man was already gone, leaving behind only the faint smell of smoke and the quiet rustle of the grass. She felt a pang of curiosity and gratitude, realizing that she had shared a night with someone extraordinary, someone whose silence had spoken louder than words. That night by the fire would stay with her forever, a memory of courage, kindness, and the quiet strength of a stranger who had offered her shelter in the vast, lonely western plains. Morning light broke softly over the western plains, spilling golden rays across the gently rolling hills. Clara stirred in her blanket, still wrapped snugly around her shoulders. The cool morning air touched her face, and she shivered lightly, realizing how much she had depended on the warmth of the fire the night before. She sat up slowly, her body stiff from sleeping on the grass, and looked around the clearing. The river glimmered in the morning sunlight, its surface sparkling like tiny diamonds. Birds called out to one another from the trees, their songs echoing in the quiet air. The sky was clear and endless, stretching above her in brilliant shades of blue. Clara felt a moment of awe at the beauty surrounding her. For all its challenges, the wilderness had a kind of majesty that no city street or crowded town could ever offer. She took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs, and tried to stretch her aching muscles. As she began to gather her small belongings, Clara noticed movement near the edge of the clearing. The man from last night emerged from behind a cluster of trees. He carried a small bundle in his hands. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't even realized he was still around, yet here he was, quietly preparing breakfast as if he had planned it all along. There was no rush in his movements, only calm, deliberate care. He placed the bundle carefully on a flat rock near the fire pit and began to arrange the food. Clara saw small pieces of roasted meat, some wild herbs, and a few berries. The simplicity of the meal struck her. It wasn't fancy, but it was wholesome, and it spoke volumes about the man's knowledge of the land and what it could provide. She watched him for a few moments, fascinated by the precision of his actions. Each movement seemed purposeful, every detail accounted for. Clara took a cautious step closer. "Good morning," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. The man didn't speak, but he gave a brief nod, acknowledging her presence. His eyes, dark and steady, met hers, and in that silent exchange, Clara felt a strange mix of respect and curiosity. She wondered about his life, about how he came to be here alone in such a vast place, and about what had led him to help a stranger the night before. Without waiting for an invitation, Clara moved closer to the fire. You cooked this?" she asked, pointing to the small meal he had prepared. He nodded again, a faint gesture that was almost like a smile. It was a quiet way of communicating, but Clara understood. There was no need for many words when actions could say so much. She felt grateful, realizing that his silence did not mean indifference. It meant thoughtfulness, patience, and perhaps even a sense of honor. They shared the meal in a quiet rhythm, eating slowly and without unnecessary chatter. Clara found herself watching him, noticing little details. The way his hands moved with care, how he occasionally scanned the surrounding woods as if ensuring no danger approached, how his eyes held a steady calm that contrasted sharply with the nervous energy she often carried. Inside her, it was strange to feel so connected to someone who barely spoke, but there was a comfort in it, a sense that words were not always necessary to understand each other. After breakfast, Clara felt a mix of gratitude and curiosity welling up inside her. I don't even know your name," she said quietly. The man tilted his head slightly, acknowledging her question, but did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into a small pouch he carried and pulled out a piece of leather, marking something on it with a careful hand. He handed it to her. It was a simple carving of his name, written in a way that she could read. It said, Tayan. Clara repeated the name softly, testing it on her lips. Tayan, she said, smiling. It felt strange but comforting to finally have a name to attach to the face she had come to trust overnight. Tayan nodded once, a gesture that seemed both formal and kind. Clara realized that he valued action over speech, that his silence was a choice, not a flaw, and that it made his gestures and movements all the more meaningful. The morning passed quietly. Clara and Tayan stayed near the fire, preparing for the day ahead. He offered her guidance without words, pointing to the best path to continue her journey and showing her how to navigate the uneven terrain. Clara listened carefully, absorbing his gestures and instructions. It was a lesson in trust and observation. She learned to notice small details, the way the wind shifted, the tracks in the dirt, the sounds of the animals nearby. It was a subtle education in survival, patience, and respect for the land. As they prepared to leave the clearing, Clara felt a sense of hesitation. She had grown comfortable in Tayan's presence, even though they had shared so little in words. There was something rare and grounding about someone who communicated through action, who observed, and who cared without needing praise or acknowledgement. She realized that kindness did not always have to be loud or verbal. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and consistent. Tayan led the way for a short distance, pointing out safe paths and warning her of potential hazards, a loose rock here, a patch of mud there. Clara followed, amazed by how much he seemed to know about the land, how attuned he was to every subtle change in the terrain. She began to understand that living alone in such a wilderness required not only physical skill, but also a deep understanding of one's surroundings. Tayan's life had clearly taught him these lessons, and now he was sharing them silently, almost without realizing it. As they walked, Clara felt herself opening up in small ways. "Do you live here all the time?" she asked gently, not expecting a long answer. Tayan shook his head slightly, a subtle motion that conveyed more than words could. He gestured toward the horizon, indicating the vastness of the land and the freedom it offered. Clara interpreted it as a simple truth. He belonged here, and this land was both his home and his sanctuary. The hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. They stopped briefly by a shaded area near the river to rest. Clara drank deeply from her canteen, feeling refreshed, and Tayan simply watched over her, his eyes scanning the surroundings. There was no sense of urgency, no unnecessary chatter, just the steady presence of someone who understood what it meant to be careful, patient, and respectful of the natural world. During the rest period, Clara noticed a few wildflowers growing near the riverbank. They were small, delicate, and vibrant, standing out against the green grass. She picked a few, arranging them carefully in her bag, thinking they would be a small reminder of this unexpected encounter. Tayan watched silently, and she imagined that he appreciated the gesture, even if he didn't say anything. In that quiet exchange, Clara felt a bond forming between them, a connection rooted in shared experience rather than words. As the day continued, Tayan eventually signaled that it was time for them to part ways. He pointed toward a trail that would lead Clara safely to the nearest settlement, while he would continue along a different path. Clara felt a pang of sadness at the thought of leaving him. She had grown accustomed to his quiet strength, his unspoken guidance, and the way he had made her feel safe in a world that could be harsh and unpredictable. Before she left, Clara turned to him and said softly, "Thank you for everything. I don't know how I would have made it through last night without you." Tayan nodded once, his expression calm but kind. He didn't speak, but she understood that he had accepted her gratitude without needing words. It was a simple, profound gesture that stayed with her as she began to follow the path he had indicated. Clara looked back once, catching a glimpse of him standing silently by the riverbank, watching her leave. She felt a deep sense of respect and admiration. Tayan's presence had been a quiet but powerful force in her life, a reminder that not all heroes announce themselves with words or grand gestures. Some offered safety, kindness, and guidance in the most unassuming ways, leaving a lasting impact on those they helped. As she continued along the trail, Clara felt a mix of emotions: gratitude, curiosity, and wonder. She thought about the lessons she had learned in just a short time. That trust could be built silently, that strength came in many forms, and that true kindness often required no explanation. She carried these thoughts with her, feeling both inspired and humbled by the quiet man who had changed the course of her journey without uttering a single word. By the time she reached the edge of the forest, Clara realized that her encounter with Tayan had already become one of the most memorable experiences of her life. It was a reminder that even in the vast, lonely wilderness, human connection could flourish in unexpected ways. And as she looked back one last time at the distant figure disappearing into the trees, she knew that this brief encounter would stay with her forever, a story of trust, courage, and the quiet power of kindness. The days that followed were quiet but full of small discoveries. Clara continued her journey along the western plains, moving cautiously but confidently. She could still feel the memory of Tayan's silent guidance lingering in her mind, as if he had left an invisible map for her to follow. Every step reminded her of the night by the fire, the warmth of the blanket, and the gentle watchfulness of the man who had appeared out of nowhere to help her. Clara traveled through open fields and shallow valleys, the wind brushing her hair and cooling her tired skin. The trail was not easy. Uneven rocks jutted out from the ground, hidden patches of mud threatened to make her horse stumble, and the sun beat down relentlessly during the midday hours. But she moved with determination. She had learned from Tayan how to observe her surroundings carefully, how to anticipate changes in the terrain, and how to keep herself safe. She remembered his gestures, his watchful eyes, and even though he was no longer beside her, she felt as if he were guiding her silently. One afternoon, Clara stopped by a small stream to rest and refill her canteen. The water was crystal clear, tumbling over smooth stones, and she could see tiny fish darting beneath the surface. She knelt to drink and watched as her reflection shimmered in the rippling water. For a moment, she allowed herself to think about the journey she had undertaken, the choices that had brought her so far, and the uncertainty that still lay ahead. She had never been on such a long, solitary journey before. Each day brought challenges, but also moments of beauty and clarity that made the hardships worthwhile. As she rested, she noticed movement in the trees on the other side of the stream. A deer stepped gracefully into a patch of sunlight, its ears flicking at the sound of rustling leaves. Clara watched in quiet admiration, careful not to disturb the animal. The wilderness, she realized, had a rhythm all its own, and those who moved with care could witness its wonders. She remembered Tayan's careful movements from the night they met, how he seemed to belong to the land as naturally as the river flowed or the wind blew. That memory encouraged her to continue observing, learning, and adapting. Night approached slowly, the sky turning shades of deep orange and purple. Clara searched for a place to camp, just as she had done before meeting Tayan. She spotted a small grove of trees near a gentle rise in the land, the perfect shelter from the wind. As she prepared her modest camp, lighting a small fire with stones and dry twigs, she thought about the lessons she had already learned: patience, observation, and the quiet courage that came from facing the unknown. Once she was settled, Clara allowed herself to reflect on the night she had spent with Tayan. She realized how deeply his presence had affected her. He had shown her that strength didn't always come in loud declarations or forceful actions. Sometimes, strength was quiet. Sometimes, it was being watchful, thoughtful, and ready to help without expecting anything in return. Clara found herself thinking about how rare it was to meet someone like that, someone who could inspire trust and admiration without saying a single word. Sleep came slowly that night, but Clara felt safer than she had expected. The fire crackled gently, and the night air carried the subtle scent of pine and earth. As she drifted between wakefulness and dreams, she imagined Tayan sitting silently by the fire, scanning the land, as he had done before. She wondered what his life had been like, how long he had lived in these plains, and what stories he carried in his heart that he had never shared with anyone. In the early hours of the morning, Clara awoke to the faint light of dawn. The sky was painted in soft pinks and blues, and the first birds began to sing. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs, and packed up her belongings. As she prepared to continue, she noticed tracks in the soft ground near her camp. They were fresh, made by someone who had passed recently. Her heart raced for a moment, but then she recognized the careful, deliberate pattern. It reminded her of Tayan's movements, the way he had acted with precision and awareness. She smiled quietly, imagining that he was perhaps nearby, watching from a distance, ensuring her safety once again. Clara continued her journey through rolling hills and open grasslands. The sun rose higher, warming her face and drying the dew on the ground. She rode with a steady pace, noticing subtle signs of the wilderness, the shape of clouds, the direction of the wind, and the tracks of small animals along the trail. Every observation reminded her of Tayan's lessons, and she felt a sense of pride in how far she had come. The solitude which had once felt intimidating now felt empowering. She was learning to trust herself, just as Tayan had trusted her to find her way. By midday, she reached a small clearing where the grass was soft, and the shade of a lone tree offered respite from the sun. She dismounted, letting her horse graze while she sat under the tree. Clara closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of the plains, the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, and the whisper of the wind moving across the land. In that moment, she felt a deep connection to the wilderness around her, a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. As she rested, Clara noticed a sudden movement near the edge of the clearing. A coyote emerged from the trees, its coat a mix of brown and gray, eyes alert and cautious. She froze, careful not to make any sudden movements. The animal paused, sniffed the air, and then trotted quietly across the field, disappearing into the distance. Clara exhaled slowly, realizing how important it was to remain calm and observant in the wilderness. Each encounter, she knew, was a lesson in patience and respect for the life around her. The afternoon passed with Clara continuing her trek, moving steadily along a narrow trail that wound through low hills. She thought about Tayan and the night by the fire more and more. There was something remarkable about his quiet strength, and she realized how much it had influenced her own behavior. She had learned to slow down, observe carefully, and act thoughtfully. The lessons of one brief encounter had already begun to change her, shaping her into someone more aware, more cautious, and yet more confident in her ability to face challenges. As evening approached, Clara searched for another campsite. She spotted a small ridge overlooking a wide valley, with a gentle stream running through it. The spot was perfect. Not only would it provide shelter, but it also offered a vantage point to see any approaching danger. Clara set up her small camp, gathering dry branches for the fire and arranging her belongings neatly. She felt a sense of accomplishment. Each day she survived, each step she took safely, reinforced her growing confidence in the wilderness. That night, Clara allowed herself to reflect deeply. She thought about her family, her home, and the life she had left behind to undertake this journey. She thought about the people she had met, especially Tayan, whose silent presence had left such a strong impression on her. It struck her how rare it was to encounter someone who could impact your life so profoundly without saying much at all. She realized that true courage and kindness were often quiet, subtle, and unnoticed by the world, but they were no less powerful for it. Clara fell asleep under a sky full of stars, the fire flickering softly beside her. She dreamed of the plains, the river, and Tayan sitting silently by his fire, watching over her. In her dreams, she felt safe, inspired, and connected to something larger than herself. The vast, beautiful wilderness, the quiet strength of those who lived within it, and the unexpected ways human kindness could appear. When she woke the next morning, she felt a renewed sense of determination. She had survived another night, learned more about the land, and gained deeper insight into herself. The memory of Tayan's quiet guidance stayed with her, shaping her actions and giving her courage for the journey ahead. She knew that the lessons she had learned from him, patience, observation, respect, and silent strength, would continue to guide her long after she had left the plains. Clara packed her belongings and mounted her horse, ready to continue. She looked back once toward the ridge she had slept on and felt a deep gratitude for the experiences she had had. Every day brought challenges, but also moments of beauty and revelation. The memory of Tayan, his silent kindness, and the lessons of the wilderness would remain with her forever, a reminder that even brief encounters could leave a lasting impact. And so Clara rode on, moving steadily through the plains, carrying with her the knowledge, courage, and quiet strength that had been gifted to her by a man who had chosen to act without words, guiding her not just through the wilderness, but also through a journey of self-discovery and resilience. The morning sun rose gently over the western plains, casting long shadows across the golden grass. Clara stirred in her blanket, waking to the soft sounds of birdsong and the distant rush of a river. Her body ached slightly from the night spent sleeping on the uneven ground, but her spirit was lighter than it had been in days. She packed her small belongings carefully, making sure everything was secure on her horse, and took a deep breath of the crisp morning air. The plains stretched endlessly before her, a mix of rolling hills, scattered trees, and glimmering rivers. Clara felt a sense of calm determination. She had grown accustomed to the challenges of traveling alone, and with each day she had grown stronger, more observant, and more confident. Yet, despite her growing independence, the memory of Tayan lingered in her mind. His quiet presence, his careful watchfulness, and the way he had offered kindness without words had left a deep impression on her. As she rode along a narrow trail, Clara noticed signs of life around her. The tracks of deer in the soft earth, birds fluttering from tree to tree, and the distant rustle of small animals moving through the grass. She moved slowly, remembering the lessons Tayan had taught her through his actions. She observed everything, making note of subtle changes in the terrain, the direction of the wind, and the sounds of the wilderness. She realized that his silent guidance had not only kept her safe, but had also trained her to become more aware, more patient, and more resilient. By midday, Clara reached a small valley where the sunlight reflected off a shallow stream. She dismounted to rest, allowing her horse to graze while she refilled her canteen and stretched her legs. As she knelt by the water, she noticed a movement at the edge of the trees. At first she thought it might be a deer or another animal, but as she looked closer, she saw a figure emerge from the shade. Her heart leapt, and for a moment she wondered if her mind was playing tricks on her, but it was no illusion. There, moving quietly and confidently, was Tayan. Clara blinked, unsure whether to call out or wait. Tayan stopped a few steps away, his eyes meeting hers. There was a faint smile in his expression, subtle but unmistakable, as if he had anticipated this moment. He carried nothing but a small satchel, and his posture was relaxed yet alert. For a moment, the two of them simply stared at each other, sharing an understanding that needed no words. The silence between them was not awkward. It was comforting, like a bridge that connected their experiences and mutual respect. Clara approached cautiously. "Tayan, I didn't expect to see you again," she said softly. He nodded once, acknowledging her words, but did not speak. His calm presence reminded her of the first night they had met, the way he had watched over her without needing to explain himself. She felt a mixture of relief, curiosity, and admiration. Here was a man who seemed perfectly at home in the wilderness, a man whose actions spoke louder than words ever could. Tayan gestured toward the stream, indicating that he had prepared a small place to rest nearby. Clara noticed a neatly arranged spot of flattened grass and stones that could serve as a seat. She sat down carefully, and Tayan joined her a few feet away. They shared the quiet of the valley, listening to the gentle rush of the stream and the distant calls of birds. Clara felt a deep sense of gratitude. His presence was grounding, a reminder of the lessons she had learned and the support she had received when she needed it most. After a few moments, Tayan reached into his satchel and pulled out a few simple items, some roasted nuts, dried berries, and a piece of bread. He placed them carefully in front of Clara. She smiled, recognizing the gesture immediately. Without words, he was offering her nourishment, care, and reassurance. Clara accepted the food, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun or the fire, but everything to do with human kindness. As they ate, Clara tried to gather the courage to speak again. I never really asked why you helped me that night," she said softly. Tayan looked at her, his dark eyes steady and calm. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he pointed toward the horizon, where the plains stretched endlessly under the clear blue sky. Clara thought she understood. He was showing her in the quietest way possible that his help came from a sense of respect and responsibility, not obligation or expectation. His actions were enough, and words were unnecessary. The day passed slowly, but every moment was filled with small, meaningful exchanges. Clara watched Tayan carefully as he moved about the clearing, gathering herbs and checking the surroundings for any signs of danger. She realized that he had an extraordinary understanding of the land, of how every sound, shadow, and movement could carry a message. She found herself learning from him once again, not through conversation, but through observation. It was as if he was teaching her not just to survive, but to live fully and mindfully in the wilderness. As afternoon approached, the sky turned soft shades of pink and orange. Clara and Tayan sat together by the stream, watching the water flow gently over smooth stones. She finally asked the question that had been on her mind since their reunion. "Do you ever live anywhere else?" Tayan shook his head slightly, a subtle gesture that said everything. The land itself was his home, and he had chosen a life of solitude and freedom, guided by the rhythms of nature rather than the demands of towns or people. Clara respected that deeply. Night fell quietly, bringing with it a chill in the air. Tayan helped Clara prepare a small fire using stones and dry wood, moving with the same calm, deliberate care she had seen before. The fire crackled softly, and the smell of burning wood mixed with the fresh scent of the river and the surrounding grass. Clara felt a sense of peace that she had never known before. She realized that Tayan's silent presence, his watchfulness, and his thoughtful actions were not just protective, they were transformative. He had changed the way she saw the wilderness, and perhaps even herself. As they settled near the fire, Clara finally found the courage to speak more openly. "I don't think I've ever met anyone like you," she said quietly. "You don't need to say much, yet you teach so much through your actions." Tayan listened, his eyes calm and steady, and gave a small nod. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, a silent affirmation that she had understood something important. Clara felt a wave of gratitude and respect. It was rare to meet someone whose strength and kindness were so quiet, yet so profoundly impactful. They spent the rest of the night in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts but sharing a connection that words could not capture. Clara thought about the lessons she had learned over the past few days: patience, observation, courage, and the power of silent strength. She realized that Tayan had shown her something rare, that true kindness often required no explanation, that trust could be built without words, and that courage could be quiet but unwavering. As she drifted into sleep, Clara reflected on how much she had grown since first meeting Tayan. She had faced fears, navigated challenges, and discovered new depths of resilience within herself. But more than that, she had learned the profound impact of quiet human connection, the kind that didn't demand attention but left a lasting impression. Tayan's presence, though minimal in words, had left an indelible mark on her heart and mind. The following morning, Clara awoke to the soft glow of dawn and the gentle sounds of the river. She realized that this night, like the first she had spent with Tayan, would remain with her forever. It was a moment of revelation, of understanding, and of deep respect. She knew that the experience had changed her, not just as a traveler on the Western Plains, but as a person learning to trust, to observe, and to act with thoughtfulness and courage. When it was time to continue her journey, Clara felt a mixture of gratitude and anticipation. She had learned so much from Tayan, and though he would not always be physically present, his lessons and example would guide her in the days ahead. She looked at him one last time, silently offering her thanks. Tayan nodded once, a simple yet profound gesture, and turned to continue his own path, disappearing into the distant hills and trees. Clara mounted her horse and began to ride, carrying with her the memory of Tayan's quiet strength, the lessons of the wilderness, and the understanding that kindness and courage often spoke louder than words. Each step forward reminded her of the journey she had undertaken, the growth she had experienced, and the remarkable connection she had shared with a man whose silence had taught her more than any conversation ever could. The morning air was crisp and calm as Clara woke to the soft glow of dawn. The western plains stretched endlessly before her, bathed in shades of gold and pink from the rising sun. For a moment, she simply sat on the edge of the ridge where she had camped, letting the quiet beauty of the land fill her senses. The river below glimmered in the early light, reflecting the sky above, and the gentle wind carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass. It was a perfect, serene morning, one that felt both hopeful and bittersweet. Clara packed her belongings slowly, taking care to leave no trace of her stay. Each action felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. The past days had changed her. She had learned to observe the land, to move with care, to trust her instincts, and to notice the smallest details that could make a difference between safety and danger. She had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident in herself. But most importantly, she had learned something about human kindness, trust, and the power of silent understanding. As she mounted her horse, Clara glanced at the ridge where she had spent the night. A feeling of anticipation mixed with longing swept over her. She had traveled these plains alone for days, yet she felt the invisible presence of Tayan, the quiet man who had taught her more than words ever could. She remembered his calm eyes, his careful gestures, and the way he had protected her without ever asking for thanks. She realized that he had given her not just guidance, but also courage, the courage to continue her journey with confidence, curiosity, and hope. Riding slowly along the trail, Clara reflected on their final encounter. The day they had met again, by the stream, had been quiet but meaningful. Tayan had shared food, offered guidance, and reminded her of the lessons she had already begun to learn. She thought about the way he had lived in harmony with the land, moving with its rhythms, respecting its boundaries, and understanding its secrets. He had shown her that life did not need to be loud or filled with constant explanation to be meaningful. True strength and kindness often existed in subtle, unassuming ways. Clara continued her journey through rolling hills, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Her horse moved steadily, guided by her newfound awareness of the land. She noticed tracks in the soft earth, the sounds of animals hidden in the grass, and the patterns of the clouds overhead. Every observation reminded her of Tayan's lessons. Even though he was no longer physically present, his influence was everywhere, in the way she moved, in the way she thought, and in the quiet confidence she carried with her. By midday, Clara reached a small clearing with a view of a distant settlement. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the faint sound of voices reached her ears. She realized she had traveled far, further than she had ever imagined she could on her own. The sight of human life was comforting, yet it also made her reflect on how much she had grown since leaving the familiar comforts of home. The wilderness had been a teacher, Tayan had been a guide, and she had discovered a resilience she never knew existed within her. As she paused to rest near a stream, Clara thought about the moments she had shared with Tayan. She remembered the first night when she had whispered, "Can I sleep here?" and how he had silently offered her shelter and warmth. She remembered the quiet meals, the subtle guidance, and the shared understanding that required no words. Each memory felt vivid, almost alive, and she realized that these encounters had left a lasting mark on her heart. She felt gratitude not only for his kindness, but also for the way he had shown her a different way of seeing the world. Even as she approached the edge of the settlement, Clara felt a sense of reverence for the land she had traveled. The western plains had tested her, challenged her, and rewarded her with moments of breathtaking beauty. She had experienced fear, uncertainty, and exhaustion, but also awe, peace, and triumph. And at the center of it all had been Tayan, the silent guide, the watchful protector, the quiet hero who had changed her journey without demanding attention or praise. Clara took a moment to reflect on what she had learned. Trust could exist without words, courage could be quiet, and kindness could be felt more than it could be spoken. She had learned to observe, to respect, and to act with care. She had learned to rely on herself while also accepting help when it was offered. and she had discovered the profound impact of a human connection that required no conversation, no explanations, and no expectations, only awareness, thoughtfulness, and presence. As she entered the settlement, Clara's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and pride. She had navigated the wilderness safely, guided by her own growing instincts and the subtle lessons Tan had given her. She found a small inn where she could rest, and as she dismounted her horse, she realized that the journey had changed her in ways she could hardly describe. She had not only survived but had been transformed, gaining strength, awareness, and a deeper understanding of herself and the world around her. During the following days, Clara shared her experiences with the people she met, though she never mentioned Tan's name. It felt as though some things were meant to remain private, sacred, and unspoken. She told stories of the plains, of the challenges she had faced, and of the lessons learned through observation and patience. She spoke of the beauty of the land, the rhythm of life in the wilderness, and the quiet strength that could exist in a single human being. People listened with fascination, unaware that the most profound part of her story was the silent man who had changed everything. Yet in her heart, Clara knew that Tan's influence would remain with her forever. She thought about him often, the way he had moved through the world with calm awareness, the way he had offered help without expectation, and the way his quiet presence had inspired her to grow, adapt, and trust herself. She realized that encounters like this were rare, and that the lessons learned from them were invaluable. Months later, as she traveled through other regions, Clara still carried the memory of that night by the fire and the day by the stream. She thought about how fear had given way to trust, how uncertainty had given way to confidence, and how a single act of kindness had reshaped her entire journey. Tan had shown her that life could be approached with patience, awareness, and compassion, and she carried these lessons with her wherever she went. Sometimes, when she stopped to rest by a river or to admire the sunset over a wide plain, she would imagine Tan sitting silently, watching over her from afar. She wondered what other travelers he had helped, what other lives he had touched without speaking a single word. And she realized that his way of living, the quiet strength, the thoughtfulness, and the unspoken courage, was a lesson not just for her, but for anyone willing to pay attention. Clara's journey continued, but she was no longer the same person who had whispered into the night, uncertain and alone. She was stronger, more aware, and more confident. She had learned to navigate not just the wilderness, but the challenges and uncertainties of life itself. And above all, she had learned the power of quiet connection, the kind that could leave a lasting impression, teach invaluable lessons, and transform a person in ways words alone could never achieve. Years later, Clara would look back on that night with a mixture of wonder and gratitude. The memory of Tan, his silent guidance, and the kindness he had offered would remain vivid. She would remember the fire, the river, the starry sky, and the way he had taught her to trust, to observe, and to act with care. It was a memory that shaped her not only as a traveler, but as a human being, a lesson in courage, compassion, and the quiet strength of those who act without expectation. And though she never saw Tan again, she carried him with her, in the confidence of her steps, the awareness of her eyes, and the kindness in her heart. The journey had begun with a simple question, "Can I sleep here?" But it had become so much more. It had become a story of growth, trust, and transformation, a reminder that even brief encounters could leave a lifetime of lessons, and that the quietest acts of kindness often had the greatest power. As Clara continued along her path, the plain stretched endlessly before her, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. She smiled softly, feeling the warmth of both the land and the memory of the man who had taught her so much. The journey would continue, but she knew that a part of her, taught by Tan, inspired by his silent courage and strengthened by the lessons of the wilderness, would carry forward forever.